Ladies and gentlemen, there's something almost amusing, if it weren't so tragic, about the way we humans cling to our worries. We wear them like badges of honor, parade them around as if our anxiety proves our importance, our control, even our love. We say things like, "If I don't worry, who will?" as though fretting is a spiritual discipline. But I invite you to consider this. What if worry is not a sign of devotion, but a quiet rebellion against the sovereignty of God? You see, worry is at its core an argument. It is the soul's insistence that unless I think about this, unless I hold this tightly, it will all fall apart. But what kind of world do we imagine we live in, where the universe is held together by our nervous system? Where the sun rises each morning because we remembered to panic the night before? No, let us be honest. Worry is a form of pride. It is the child whispering instructions to the pilot mid-flight. It is the clay pot fretting about the hands of the potter. But worse, it is a thief. It robs us of the present by chaining us to a future we do not control and a past we cannot change. And the irony, the delicious irony, is that the very one who can carry it all, we often leave out of the conversation entirely. We sit at the dinner table with our fears and invite no guest more powerful than ourselves. But Scripture does not say, "Think really hard about your troubles." It says, "Cast your cares upon him, for he cares for you." It does not say, "Work it all out in your head before you trust." It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." There's a reason we're told to give it to God, not because it's poetic or comforting or convenient, but because it is the only true and sane response to the truth, that He is God and we are not. Imagine a child who, in the middle of the night, wakes up afraid. The shadows on the wall look like monsters. The closet creaks. The air feels heavy. And what does the child do? Does he analyze the situation? Does he construct a careful argument about why the shadow cannot possibly hurt him? No. He runs to his father, and the moment he is in his father's arms, the monsters do not disappear, but they no longer matter. So it must be with us. God has not promised that life will be free of shadows, but He has promised that we will never walk through them alone. He has promised that if we give Him our burdens, He will carry them. Not because He is obligated, but because He is good, because He is Father. So stop worrying, not because your problems are small, but because your God is great. Stop worrying, not because you are blind to the dangers, but because you trust the one who sees the end from the beginning. Stop worrying and give it to God, not because it's easy, but because it is the only path that leads to peace. And perhaps, just perhaps, when you finally place the weight you were never meant to carry into His hands, you will find not only relief, but joy. That strange and holy joy that whispers, "I am not in control." And that is the best news I've heard all day. Worry is a form of pride, not devotion. Worry, though often disguised as love, responsibility, or care, is more deeply rooted in pride than we care to admit. Pride, after all, is not always loud or boastful. Sometimes it wears the face of concern. It whispers to us in quiet moments, suggesting that if we do not hold the world together, it will fall apart. It persuades us that our vigilance is necessary, that our constant mental effort is somehow noble. But at its heart, worry declares, "I must do this because no one else, perhaps not even God, will." That is pride in its subtlest and most dangerous form. When we worry, we are not merely processing information or preparing for outcomes. We are resisting the reality that we are not in control. Pride tells us we should be. It wants the final word. It wants certainty. It wants the seat on the throne, even if it trembles under the weight of it. Worry becomes the daily ritual of our pride, a way of playing God without the power to actually be Him. We try to control the uncontrollable, prepare for the unpredictable, and fix what hasn't even happened yet. We don't say this out loud, of course. Instead, we mask it with phrases like, "I'm just being realistic," or "someone has to think these things through." And it's true, we are called to be wise, to plan, and to think carefully. But wisdom is not the same as worry. One stems from humility, the awareness that we are stewards and not sovereigns. The other stems from pride, the belief that without our constant mental engagement, something terrible will happen. Wisdom surrenders to God's authority. Worry tries to replace it. Pride tells us that we are indispensable. It convinces us that if we don't fret, something will go wrong, but look closer. Worry often reflects the assumption that God's timing is flawed, that His power might not stretch far enough, or that His attention might be too divided to care for us completely. We may not say such things aloud, but our anxious thoughts reveal what we truly believe. Worry doesn't just question the future, it questions God's role in it. It is strange, isn't it? We believe in the God who formed galaxies with a word, who carved rivers into the earth, who holds the stars in place. And yet we wonder if He can handle our job interview, our finances, or our children's future. Pride is what tells us, this is too small for Him, or worse, this is too big even for Him. And so we worry, as though we are better equipped than the Almighty to bear these concerns. There is a deceptive dignity to worry. It makes us feel involved. It gives us the illusion of agency, of responsibility, even virtue. But it's a poor substitute for real trust. Trust requires surrender. It requires us to admit we are not the center of the universe, nor the keeper of all outcomes. Pride finds that deeply offensive. It would rather stew in anxiety than kneel in submission. But the act of handing over our burdens is not weakness. It is the strongest confession of faith we can make. Worry, by contrast, is a confession of doubt disguised as diligence. Many of us think that if we let go, everything will collapse. But the truth is, most of what we carry was never ours to hold in the first place. There is a difference between responsibility and control. We are called to act wisely, love faithfully, and work diligently. But control, that belongs to God. Pride ignores this boundary and tries to cross it, to manage things beyond our reach. Worry is what happens when pride crashes against the limits of human power. Sometimes we spiritualize worry, imagining that the depth of our concerns somehow mirrors the depth of our faith. But worry is not proof of compassion. It is proof that our trust is misdirected. Compassion leads us to prayer, to action, to presence. Worry leads us to panic, paralysis, and fear. And fear, more often than not, is the fruit of pride. Fear that things will not unfold according to our plan, our vision, our timing. At its root, worry is a form of self-worship. It places us at the center and demands that the world answer to us. Pride cannot abide the idea that someone else might be steering the ship, especially when the route takes us through waters we did not choose. But humility, real humility, accepts that we are not the captain, we are passengers, and the one at the helm knows what he is doing. Worry balks at this. Pride finds such surrender too costly. But the cost of pride is far greater, for it demands that we carry the weight of things we were never meant to bear. In our moments of anxiety, we are often unaware that pride is driving us. It doesn't shout. It seeps in slowly, making itself at home in our thoughts. It turns our minds into echo chambers, bouncing around all the things that might go wrong, rehearsing worst-case scenarios as though we were preparing for battle. But we are not soldiers on the front line of fate. We are children in the hands of a good Father. Pride forgets this. Worry feeds off that forgetfulness. And so, rather than see worry as a personality trait, or even as a symptom of stress, we must begin to see it for what it often is, a spiritual misalignment. It is the prideful insistence that unless we hold the threads of the world together, everything will unravel. But this is not faith. This is fear dressed in pride's clothing. Faith says, even if I do not see the way forward, I trust the one who does. Pride says, unless I see the way forward, I will not rest. Worry is what happens when we believe the latter. We are not meant to carry what only God can handle. There is a sacred line drawn in the heart of every person between what we are meant to carry and what we must lay down. Much of our anxiety, exhaustion, and even bitterness comes from blurring that line, from picking up burdens that were never ours to bear. We are not meant to carry what only God can handle, and when we try, we crush ourselves under the weight of it. This is not because we are weak, but because we are not made for omnipotence. We are made for dependence. There is an illusion many of us live under, the illusion of control. We believe that if we think hard enough, plan thoroughly enough, or stress consistently enough, we can manage the outcomes of our lives. But this is a fiction. We are not the authors of tomorrow. We are not the ones who hold the wind in our hands or command the seas to be still. And yet we live as if we are. We lie awake in the dark, reworking conversations, pre-solving problems, calculating possibilities. We try to outmaneuver what hasn't even happened yet, not realizing that in doing so, we are placing ourselves in the position of God. And no soul can bear that weight. The burdens we pick up are often subtle. We carry the fear for our children's future, the pressure of financial security, the dread of making the wrong decision, the weight of everyone's expectations. These are not light things. They are important, they matter, but importance does not equal ownership. Just because something matters deeply to us doesn't mean we are meant to carry it alone. We are invited, commanded, even to cast our cares upon God, not because they are insignificant, but precisely because they are too significant to carry on our own. There is a difference between being responsible and being sovereign. Responsibility is part of being human. We are called to work hard, love well, and steward what is entrusted to us. But sovereignty, knowing every outcome, controlling every variable, bearing every possibility, that belongs only to God. We trespass into anxiety when we try to be more than we were created to be, and every time we carry what we cannot control, we suffer. Not because we failed, but because we stepped outside the boundary of trust and into the wilderness of self-reliance. We were never asked to carry the full weight of the world. That role is already filled. The one who holds all things together has not asked us to assist in his sovereignty. He has invited us into obedience, not omniscience. He has asked for faithfulness, not for knowledge, but we forget. We believe the lie that says if we don't worry about it, we don't care about it. We think that releasing control is the same as giving up. But it's not. It is an act of faith. It is an act of surrender, and surrender, contrary to our instincts, is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is knowing where our strength ends and where God's begins. Many of us are tired not because life is too heavy, but because we are carrying more than we were meant to. We carry shame for mistakes that God has already forgiven. We carry outcomes for choices we haven't made yet. We carry questions without answers and futures we haven't lived, and all the while, the quiet voice of God is whispering, "Give it to me. That was never yours to hold." But we cling, we resist. We think that if we let go, everything will fall apart. We don't realize that we're already falling apart from holding on so tightly. Carrying what only God can handle doesn't just wear us down, it reshapes us. It forms us into people ruled by fear, not peace. It blinds us to the beauty of the present because we're always bracing for what might come next. It robs us of rest. It turns prayer into panic. It makes joy feel irresponsible. It teaches us to live defensively, always watching for disaster, always waiting for the next disappointment. But this is not the life we were promised. The life God offers is one of trust, of peace that surpasses understanding, of burdens shared and hearts unburdened. When we carry what isn't ours, we not only suffer ourselves, but we also block others from seeing God through us. If we live as though everything depends on us, we communicate a gospel of self-sufficiency, not divine sufficiency. Our lives become testimonies of strain rather than surrender. We preach anxiety with our pace and fear with our tone. But when we lay down what we cannot carry, we bear witness to something greater. We show the world what it means to trust a God who is truly in control. Letting go is not passive. It is not a denial of reality or an excuse for laziness. It is active dependence. It is choosing again and again to place the weight back into the hands of the one who is strong enough to carry it. It is the discipline of refusing to play God even when our pride tempts us to try. It is an act of courage, of humility, of spiritual clarity. Because when we give God what is His, we finally make space to carry what is ours today, not tomorrow, not 10 years from now, just today. There is immense freedom in that. To live within the boundary of today is to live with clarity, with focus, with peace. But we can only do that if we entrust tomorrow to the one who already stands there. Only He sees what we cannot. Only He understands what we cannot explain. And only He is powerful enough to bear what would break us. When we finally release what we were never created to carry, we begin to experience something rare and holy, a soul at rest. Not because the world is quiet, but because our trust is no longer in our own hands. We stop trying to write a story we were only ever meant to read. We stop attempting to hold together what only the author of life can sustain. We remember that we are not the answer, not the solution, not the source of hope. We are the ones who follow, not the ones who lead, and that is not failure. That is faith. Trust begins where understanding ends. Trust begins where understanding ends. This truth unsettles many of us because we have been trained, both by our culture and by our fears, to believe that understanding is the foundation of all wisdom. We feel safe when we can explain things. We feel in control when we can map the future, predict outcomes, or find reasons for our pain. We chase answers like lifelines, convinced that peace will arrive once we've grasped the why, the how, and the when. But faith does not grow in the soil of certainty. It flourishes precisely where certainty ends. There is a deep human longing to make sense of things. We want clarity before we commit, direction before we obey, and assurance before we release control. But trust does not operate on such terms. It begins when we choose to move forward even when clarity hasn't come. Trust is what we do when we cannot see. It is stepping into the unknown because we are sure of the one who leads us. Understanding says, "Show me and I will follow." Trust says, "I will follow even if I never fully see." We like to think that spiritual maturity means knowing more, grasping more, seeing more. But in the kingdom of God, maturity often looks like surrender. It looks like obedience without a blueprint. It looks like praise in the middle of unanswered questions. There are moments when the only act of faith left to us is to say, "God, I don't understand, but I still believe you are good." That is the beginning of real trust, not blind faith, but deeply rooted faith that knows God's character even when His plan is hidden. When we demand understanding before we trust, we're making ourselves the gatekeepers of faith. We're saying, "I'll allow God to be in control, but only if He explains Himself first." This is not trust, It is bargaining. It is conditional obedience, rooted not in love but in fear. We want a guarantee before we let go. But God rarely offers guarantees the way we want them. He offers himself instead. He doesn't always explain our suffering or lay out the road ahead, but he does say, "I am with you." And that is the promise upon which true trust is built. Life is full of moments that defy explanation. A job is lost without warning. A prayer seems unanswered. A relationship shatters, and illness comes, and in those moments the question echoes in our minds, why? It's a natural question, but sometimes heaven is silent, not because God doesn't care, but because he is drawing us into a deeper reliance, a trust not built on facts or formulas, but on relationship. He is not calling us to understand everything. He is calling us to trust that he does. There is something beautiful and terrifying about this kind of trust. It is the trust of Abraham climbing a mountain with a knife in his hand and no lamb in sight. It is the trust of Job sitting in ashes and saying, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." It is the trust of Mary hearing an angel speak of an impossible birth and simply replying, "Let it be to me according to your word." These are not stories of people who understood everything. They are stories of people who believed even when they didn't. Trust does not deny the value of understanding. It simply places it in its proper order. We are not asked to switch off our minds or reject reason. God made the intellect, and he is not threatened by our questions. But trust recognizes that there are limits to our comprehension, and it accepts those limits with humility. It acknowledges that we are not God, and that his ways, though sometimes hidden, are never wrong. Trust bows before mystery, not in resignation, but in reverence. Many of us fear what we cannot understand. We feel exposed, vulnerable, even foolish. We want the map before we take the journey, but the life of faith is not a map. It is a lamp unto our feet, just bright enough for the next step. Understanding would demand a floodlight. Trust walks by candlelight, steady and quiet. And in that quiet, God meets us, not with explanations, but with presence. There is a kind of peace that surpasses understanding. The very wording suggests that we do not arrive at peace by solving all our questions. We arrive at peace when we relinquish our need to have all the answers. We arrive at peace when we lean on God's character more than our comprehension. It is not a peace rooted in perfect circumstances or neat resolutions. It is a peace born of proximity to God, even in the storm. To trust where we do not understand is not to ignore reality. It is to see a deeper reality, a greater truth that God is at work, even when we cannot trace his hand. This trust is not naive. It does not pretend that pain isn't painful or that confusion isn't hard. It simply refuses to believe that confusion is the whole story. It looks beyond what is visible and anchors itself in what is eternal. We often ask for answers when what we need is assurance. We want explanations, but God offers himself. He invites us not into perfect understanding, but into perfect union, and it is in that union, walking with him, trusting him, yielding to him, that we find strength to go on. Trust begins where understanding ends, not because we have failed to understand, but because we have finally let go of the demand to always do so. In that surrender, there is rest. In that surrender, there is freedom. In that surrender, trust is born.